These are the experiences that harness my ability to be in a position where I can really add value at being in their shoes. So that's a very, very important skill that really differentiates, what you need as an advisor and a trusted advisor and an angel versus actually being a founder.
Hello and welcome to the Founded and Grounded podcast. My name's Laura Rawlings and I'm co-hosting alongside business startup coach Ollie Collards. Ollie, how are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, the clocks went forward yesterday and it feels lighter, and that spring's around the corner, and there's a change in the air, which is good.
Oh yeah, I know, and I'm looking forward to having our evenings back. I've enjoyed hibernating, but yeah, I'm ready now, ready for some nice evenings out.
Yeah, we want to bring out the pizza oven in the evening. That's our first task this week, I think.
Ah, is that a bit like when you get the barbecue out? You've got to get some wire brush and soapy water and start scrubbing it all down.
It's not too bad because it gets up to like 500 degrees, so it incinerates everything.
Blimey.
So yeah, it's not so bad as the barbecue.
Wow, I feel this is we could almost do an episode on its own, the sorts of exciting things you're looking forward to cooking al fresco, getting out the barbecue, getting out the pizza oven. I'm liking the sound of all of this. Very nice. Let's talk about who our entrepreneur is this week. I've really enjoyed listening to the conversation that the two of you had. So do the honours and introduce who we're going to hear from today, Ollie.
So I caught up with Andy Ayim, who is founder of the Angel Investing School. And I've actually been on the programme myself and absolutely a massive advocate of everything that Andy is doing, and really excited for people to learn a bit more about Andy's background and why he does what he does.
It was so interesting. So I came at this completely blank sheet of paper, didn't know anything about Andy. And when you initially mentioned it, I thought this was about teaching people. I suppose I was thinking people like me about angel investing, venture capital, and how to get it, how you might be able to attract some of that funding, not how to be one. But if you want to make a real change, as we'll hear in his conversation, actually what he's doing is so much better than what I initially thought. And yeah, you've experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, and it's about giving people access and opportunity to become an angel investor and have the knowledge and skills, and also the mindset to be able to do it. And I think that's a big barrier. So, Andy's truly doing some transformational work.
Before we just go on, very briefly, have you subsequently invested? I don't know how long ago you did the course, but has this encouraged you to invest? I
haven't invested yet. No, I think I've got some of the knowledge now. I think that I'm going to start small and see where it goes. I've done crowdfunding in the past, but not specific, small checks for angels.
That's as far as I've gone, crowdfunding. And it always feels really nice to be supporting a business that you can see has got a great idea. So yeah, this is a good conversation. Let's jump in straight away, shall we then, and find out a bit more about Andy's fascinating background and what the Angel Investing School is.
Andy, good morning. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. It's a great day here in Essex, but still a lot to be grateful for and a lot to smile about.
Amazing, Andy. Well, it's great to see your smile, and one of those characters that your smile is definitely very infectious. So we'll talk about that in a bit more in due course. But listen, thank you very much for coming on the Founded and Grounded show. I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. Before we get started, if you could tell our listeners exactly what Angel Investing School is all about, and also why you got started with it in the first place, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for giving me a platform to share more about my story. So the Angel Investing School, put simply, is an online school and community that trains professionals on how to get started with investing into startups. Angel investing as a topic is very opaque. A very small portion of the world even know what it means. And venture capital as an industry is very similar. So what we try and do is we try and democratize access to this financial education to make it more accessible for everyday people like you and I. And how we got started, which is a part of your question, I want to go a little bit more back into kind of how I grew up, because I think that context really matters. So I grew up in Tottenham in North London in a very multicultural community. And a lot of my parents and uncles and aunties were in, like working class kind of jobs, like nursery nurses or minicab drivers. So I didn't have much exposure to the world of entrepreneurship or, even professional jobs in the city. So I'll give you an example. When I was younger, my dad used to have a relationship with my local corner shop owner, and he used to order the FT weekly to that shop because the Financial Times wasn't sold in Tottenham because the readership was in the area. And by my dad doing that, it really exposed us as children, as we're growing up as teenagers, to the world of finance and business and middle class lifestyles, and it raised our aspirations. And we realized that actually, like, where we're from doesn't determine where we end up in life. What we need is access to opportunity. So that whole theme of, access and opportunity really grew with me as I went through my professional career, and realized actually, like, a lot of the working world is very different to this world that I grew up with in Tottenham. And actually, talent is distributed equally across the world, but opportunity isn't. So how can I play a role in really democratizing more access to opportunity? And the Angel Investing School is one of many ways in which I can express myself to democratize opportunity.
Love that, Andy. And I was going to ask a bit more about your childhood. So, talking about that time, you've obviously spoken about your dad raising your aspirations in terms of showing you what is possible in the world, which is fantastic. But were there any signs at that point of time that you may have taken like an entrepreneurial path?
What I would say looking back now is that there's a real value to being non-conformist. And actually, I'll go further to say that when you're non-conformist, you can often operate at the edge of your comfort zone. And through doing so, it leads to your greatest leaps in learning. So a great example is, when I was 21, I went backpacking to South America, and a lot of my friends said it's not the black thing to do, and you're probably gonna die. Why are you going? And I remember, like, when I first arrived in Peru, where I started this journey for 3 months, I was in a hostel and I was very ignorant. I didn't realize that a hostel meant that I was sharing a room with other people. So I ended up like literally like locking my backpack to the leg of my bed. And I remember that night just feeling like, what the hell have I just signed up to? 3 months later, I looked back and thought this was one of the best and most impactful things I've done in my life. And what it did is it really raised my aspiration and opened me up to different cultures and learning from immersing myself into different cultures and worlds, whether it's learning about the Inca tribe, doing the Inca show and going to Machu Picchu, or taking incredible perspective pictures on the salt flats in Bolivia. And what I naturally did was I started writing personal emails and long blog posts to my friends back home to expose them to what I was learning. And little did I know that actually that was a strength of mine, and it became a core part of my story going on. I often would write letters back home about what I was experiencing in a language that they would understand and would find accessible. So a great example of that was in 2014 and 15. I moved to San Francisco with a consulting firm that I was working with. And my main premise was to build a business that was kind of like a blank sheet of paper. So I ended up networking with a lot of the leading venture capital firms out there: Sequoia, Lightspeed Ventures, Greylock Partners, and Andreessen Horowitz. And if you like, I had this fast track MBA into that venture capitalism and how it works. But again, my natural inclination was to write blogs on Medium, which you can still find today, and LinkedIn, about the experiences that I was learning, about how I grew up feeling like failure. I couldn't afford to fail. So failure was very negative. But here I'm learning that failure is a badge of honor, but when you frame it as actually a learning experience. And there's no failure if you're truly paying attention to your learnings. So I was learning all of these lessons and packaging it up and sharing it to basically people back home. And I think that started to build like my brand in this space around like really democratizing access to this education of what venture capitalism, startups, and angel investing is. And that was back in 2015, and I've just continued that good work till today. The last thing I want to add on to that actually, Ollie, is someone described this to me when I went backpacking, that when you're on the beach and you look across the shore, sometimes you can feel like, the sun meets the ocean. But it's a matter of perspective, because the sun never meets the ocean. And if you rise up to a high enough level, you'll realize that. And I think the same is true for human potential and aspirations. Like, if you're able to mentor, inspire, and encourage someone, you can really raise their aspirations. And then it comes down to them as to whether they're really determined and persistent enough to go the road. And this is a lot of the advice that I give to entrepreneurs, is that it's not about intelligence or being smart. Actually, like, the company is a result of the people that you hire and your ability to be persistent and to not give up, even though you're going to face trials and tribulations and have those tough moments where you have to overcome adversity.
Absolutely love that, Andy, and thanks for sharing some of your experiences there. We're going to have a chat off air because I went backpacking in Central and South America as well, and a big fan of
Wow.
the Salt Flats and the Inca Trail. So
I
we'll have
love
to come
that.
back to that in due course.
And we
But
will for sure.
yeah, definitely. So you're talking about opening up opportunities because obviously you saw that opportunities weren't equally distributed. So what kind of like injustices did you see, or just not people not having access to opportunities that other people potentially do have?
Absolutely. So at its core, when I looked at the data that was available, I learned that less than 11% of venture capital went to women or female founders, despite the fact they made over 50% of the population. And then when I looked at, how much venture capital was going to black founders, I saw it was less than 0.24%. And that was injustice to me because I feel like entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. So access to opportunity for entrepreneurs should equally come from everywhere. And when I learned about stories like Kevin Systrom, the founder of Instagram, when he first started the business, it was called Bourbon, and he was a Stanford alumni. And he said on the Masters of Scale podcast with Reid Hoffman, I don't know why this angel investor from Stanford's alumni invested 100,000 into him. There was that nepotism and that access that he had to the network that gave him the opportunity to have the runway to iterate, pivot, and figure out what then became Instagram. So when we talk about access to funding in this space, it's so important because it correlates to outcomes and what you're able to achieve. And everyone should have equal access and runway and time and space to experiment and figure out if they're able to scale a successful business or not. And the current dynamics of the system that we operate in with venture capital doesn't allow for that. Instead, what you find is that there's a lot of often middle class white men in positions of power as general partners who are making these decisions based on their networks, like who's ex McKinsey that I used to work with, or who's ex Oxford or Cambridge that I used to go university with, and invested in more people like themselves. So the answer in short is I'm trying to train up more diverse professionals so that they can pattern match against themselves and invest in more people like themselves. And in doing so, we have a richer pool of founders because at my core, I believe that the innovations that serve society should be created by a representative pool that looks a lot more like society that we live in.
Love that, Andy. And in terms of Angel Investing School, how did you go from that initial idea and that vision to actually validate there was enough demand to set this up?
It's a great question. So what I did after I started realizing that a lot of people were asking me for introductions to angel investors so they can learn about angel investing and getting started is I thought I need a more scalable way to serve these people. I can't keep making these manual introductions. It's not fair on the angels. It's not a great use of my time. So I ended up sending out a tweet. This is classic MVP for any founder that's listening. And in that tweet, I had a really horrific PDF that's really embarrassing. So I'm not going to share it with you on this podcast. But on that PDF, I had like a 6-step curriculum to say, this is what I want to cover over a course to teach people about angel investing. I had a lot of people reply to that tweet. I wouldn't dare say it went viral, but we had like, over 100 people retweet it or comment on that tweet. So as a result of that, I created an Airtable form to say, if you're really interested in this, fill out this registration form. We had about 50 people fill out that form. I said, if you're really, really interested in this, then here's a form to make a payment for £300 to secure your place. That was the initial fee. Okay, the prices have since increased. And through hook or crook or phone calls and manually onboarding people and speaking to people one-to-one, we had 17 people eventually sign up for that first experience. So then I brought in experienced angels and VCs from my network to teach on each week of that curriculum. And that was the first ever class for the Angel Investing School back in February 2020. And I remember we had to even pivot because it was meant to be in person. But then because of the COVID crisis in March, we had to change that and make sure that it was remote. And again, that shaped the business model that we have today, where we still do remote facilitation for classes, for corporates, for individuals, and as part of our membership. So yeah, I think this journey of being a startup is constant learning, experimentation, and being open-minded to change as long as you're staying on track with the mission that you're trying to achieve.
Love that, Andy. And for people listening who maybe haven't been exposed to the world of angel investing or venture capital, can you just break it down in real simple terms and just tell people what angel investing is and what is venture capital?
Absolutely. So on this journey of starting a business, There may come certain times along that journey where you feel like you need additional capital, some more money in the business to help you grow. It could be because you want to hire more people, because you want to develop some technology, because you want to grow into a new region. Maybe because you're in a good situation where you have more customer demand for what you can serve, and therefore you want to scale your operations in order to serve that demand. So in those situations, you consider actually where can you get capital from. For a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, you can't really go to the bank because they require certain trading history, like 2 years of bank account details, which you don't have because you're just getting started. You might be able to tap into some grants or some competitions, but they're often very long applications of only very few people getting awarded those opportunities. So many people turn to what we call angel investors, which are individuals that are willing to risk their own money and invest into early stage entrepreneurs in the hope that they're gonna, different motivations, but they're gonna learn about a new industry, maybe learn about a new technology, maybe learn about building a business from the feet of an entrepreneur, maybe learn about, it could be like growing a business on aspects of that, or it could be to make a certain return. And in doing that, they invest into the startup in the hope that they can go along this journey with the startup as that startup continues to grow. Okay, and with that funding, the reason that is very different from a bank loan, for example, is that you're not often paying back debt and interest, but instead you're exchanging it for shares in your business. Okay, with a venture capitalist, they're doing something very similar, but instead they've got investors that have invested into their fund, and they, as money managers, they're investing that money into different early stage startups. And their hope is that some of those startups will grow to be really big and make them enough of a return that they can return their money to the investors that invested into their fund. So the real subtle difference between that angel investor and that VC or venture capitalist is that the venture capitalist is incentivized with their business model to make an extremely large return in order to make money for the investors that invested into them. Whereas an angel investor is an individual, so their motivations could vary, and therefore even making a return may not even be the primary requirement for an angel investor. We can get more into that if that's helpful.
Lovely, Andy, and it's a really good description of the two, and actually describing it in very practical terms as well. So thank you for that. I wanted to change track slightly because you talked about it before, but the word community, and I've done the angel investing school, and I think it's fantastic, and you have really fostered that sense of community within it. But the word community often gets bandied about. Some people often confuse it with audience. So I just want to ask, what does community mean to you?
I'm going to share two stories, I think, that really sum up in a beautiful way for me. Growing up, I originated from Ghana, but grew up in the UK. And there's a proverb that we grew up with called, it takes a village to raise a child. And the whole philosophy there is that, like, is I am because of us. So the more I contribute to the community, the more I pour into others, the more I become, the more I'm in service to myself. And that whole philosophy is around like building a value-aligned community where you can do meaningful work with people who care. And the second story that really ties it together nicely for me is Kevin Kelly, who used to be the Wired editor-in-chief, wrote a really popular blog called 1,000 True Fans. And by a true fan, he's talking about going deeper than just your audience to understand the people that want to learn from you, be around you, and be around each other on this shared experience for a number of years. And the real difference between like a real avid community versus just an audience is that relationship over that transaction, right? So it's the fact that we want to build a long-term relationship that surpasses just a transaction, whereas sometimes with an audience, it can be very transactional. You know, I'm writing a blog post to read my blog post versus a community where we're having discussions, where I'm in support of what you're doing, where you're in support of what I'm doing, where we're learning from each other. It is a more symbiotic relationship that actually like lasts a long tenure of time. You know, so, and I count our relationship, like my relationship with you, in that same way. Like the fact that I'm on your podcast, the fact that you're a part of the Angel Investing School, the fact that we're going to go on to have more discussions and hopefully collaborate in the future. That's exactly what communities do for each other.
Love that definition there, Andy. That's fantastic. Moving track slightly. So obviously you're an angel investor yourself and you're a founder. I want to know what the number one skill that is different between being a founder and an investor.
So this is going to be a really unpopular opinion for many of the venture capitalists out there, but I believe that you have to earn the right to advise an entrepreneur. And to earn the right, you have to have operational experience in a high growth startup yourself. So you felt the growing pains of what it means to grow a business and how hard it is to, scale culture, to have an inclusive culture, to build a product that customers love and endures as you build, to have the growing pains of making trade-off decisions that are really difficult around fundraising and building teams. Like, you have to be on the inside to feel that and experience that. Or you have to have started a startup yourself. So when I look back on my journey, I started a startup with my brother and a few friends called Mixtape Madness 15 years ago, which we scaled to over $1 million in revenue, and my brother still runs the business today. And we didn't take on any angel or VC funding, basically because we didn't know what it was at the time. But it was a blessing in disguise because we ended up building a customer-funded business, which is a primary skill actually of an entrepreneur. So going along that journey, I learned the growing pains of what it means to build and grow a business. So it put me in a more qualified position to start advising entrepreneurs, especially with the lessons that I was learning, like I explained before, from my blog posts and then speaking at events. And then I went to work in high growth startups as a product manager for World First, Investec, head of product management at Zilch. These are the experiences that harnessed my ability to be in a position where I can really add value and not be valuing secretive to a founder when advising them, because I've been in their shoes. So that's a very, very important skill that really differentiates, what you need as an advisor and a trusted advisor and an angel versus actually being a founder.
A word about our sponsors. As a founder, cybersecurity isn't top of your priorities. Yet Alliance has identified cyber threats as one of the top 3 risks facing business globally. This is where Nova Blue comes in. Its founder, Steve Mason, was technical director with GCHQ. He was in charge of keeping the nation safe from cyber threats. He set up Nova Blue to help keep businesses safe. Nova Blue are offering Founded and Grounded listeners a free cybersecurity health check. Simply go to nova-blue.co.uk/podcast offer. So, Ollie, one of the first things I think we should mention is about networks, because this just runs through this conversation today. And as I was listening to you and Andy talking, I was reminded of a conversation that I had with a friend who was they'd been recently recruited to work in political risk analysis. And they were talking to their boss who was recruiting for someone else. And I remember my friend saying they simply got the CV of the applicants and binned everyone who hadn't been to Oxford. Wow. And they just said, why would I pick anyone else? I know exactly what I'm getting if I go for that type of candidate. And I was astonished because I was completely ignorant to the fact that there's a bias, for starters. I mean, I was quite young at the time, but also how these kind of networks run deep and can run against you, and great for people who get out there and realise, well, I'm going to have to create my own here, which is, in a way, what Andy's done. But finding one that works for you, it's very much worth getting out there and getting to know people, isn't it?
It is, and it becomes quite cyclical, doesn't it? Because people like to hire people like them. And then it builds that cycle of, no one entering the angel investing industry or VC world because, people don't represent them. So why do people get involved with it in the first place? And I think it really takes something quite significant and seismic to actually change that. And I love what Andy is all about and trying to solve that pain point.
Yeah, absolutely. Hearing how he created the Angel Investing School, putting that note out there on Twitter, it brings us back to minimum viable product, which is the words that, if there's one thing I take away from this series, it's just the strength in getting out there with that, and how he then evolved it with what turned into his community, and doing it kind of collectively. I think in the past I've been guilty of thinking you've got to come up, serve the answer, serve the perfect product, and then that's fine. But actually so many successful businesses I see with a really strong community, right from the start, right from that little tiny idea of doing it together.
Yeah, and he's obviously built up that community over time, and then he's put out the offer out there into the world, and obviously got an interested list of potential people willing to take part in actually the first angel investing school. And then he's gone a step further and says, right, money where your mouth is, who wants to pay for it now? And then obviously, he's created that first course But it sounds obviously quite easy, but he spent probably years building up that community first, which is the pivotal point. And I think a lot of great businesses are built off that community first aspect. And I think where a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes struggle is they think they have to create the whole thing straight away. Whereas if you do have a simple kind of MVP, you can actually build the track as you're going round. So keep on laying it and building it as you go round. And then you don't have to build the whole thing before you start selling it.
And I guess some of the risk is mitigated more there as well, isn't it? When you're doing it like that, because you're not just making a massive leap into the unknown. You already have your feelers out there. And as we saw and heard, that funnel of, right, would you be interested in this? Okay, what about if it was like this? And it's just like narrowing down the funnel till you put in the calls and then you've got the people who are going to sign up and come along to it.
Yeah, there was no need for him to kind of think about all the technology he was going to use, like thinking about all the facilitators that he was going to involve in the program. He didn't need to do all of that first. He needed to know, was there a demand for it? Were people interested? And then once he had that answer, then he can start developing the later stages of it.
Yeah, so true. And then it going on beyond that. I mean, just community as the bedrock. Beforehand, building your audience, whatever you want to call it, but you've got to have that connection with people to start with and a place to sell to. And then it going beyond that initial transaction and becoming part of a community. This is a theme that does run through the two of yours, conversation together, doesn't it? That symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and I like what Andy says here in terms of it not being transactional. It's about the exchange of value between people. And I think whether you go to one of their meetups and witness all the interaction between the community and people adding value to one another and exchanging knowledge, and everyone's got a shared purpose and a shared vision. And Andy has purposely done that to bring everyone together and make it a very inclusive environment. And it feels really special. It honestly does feel very special to be part of that.
That's good to hear. Before we move on and hear about some of the challenges he's experienced, I do just want to pick up on one of the points he raised about who can advise entrepreneurs and what qualifies someone. And I find this fascinating. I am a therapist, you're a coach. And for both of these kinds of titles, you can get qualifications in it, and you can belong to various professional bodies and, have your insurance and have recommendations. But ultimately, anyone can put themselves out there as that person, can't they? It's not regulated in that way. And when it's your business, same as when it's your health, you want to be savvy about whose advice you're listening to. And so what he was saying about, right, who can give this advice, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think you've got to obviously do your due diligence in terms of the person that you're speaking with and see about their past experiences and their successes and their failures, and, go and speak to some of their past customers. I think that's the best way of doing the acid test, is actually going out there, speaking to them and seeing how they've helped that person actually progress and transition and make a change in the world, because otherwise you're going to go into it with potentially getting bad advice, and that could probably hinder rather than help you. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, talking of hindrances, let's move along and hear about some of the challenges then that Andy experienced in doing this, and in particular some of his favourite failures.
I think one of the favourite failures so far have been on being too transactional when I should have been focused on building relationships. So one of the early successes with Angel Investing School is that Google took us on as a client to train the Black network at Google on how to invest into startups. And I nearly eroded a relationship I had with someone because I was too transactional, and they were in another tech company in kind of leading with like, hi, I'm doing this work for Google, I'd love to do it at your company. What I should have really done is just checked in and said like, hi, I'd love to just catch up, have a coffee, find out how you're going, how things are doing. And if the conversation naturally goes in a direction where I could share more about what I've been doing, great. If it doesn't, actually it's fine, because I'm just maintaining a relationship that I have. And looking back, I really regret that at the time. And I'm so happy that I went back and I apologized to that person and mended it and just said, you know what, that was really transactional. That wasn't me. And I put my ego and pride aside and came and just had that conversation. And in doing so, I've managed to maintain the relationship with that person.
Love that, Andy. And I mean, what advice would you give to people, like, if they think they've made a mistake? How do you resolve mistakes in running a business?
I think part of being a really inclusive leader is being able to actually put your hand up and say when you've got things wrong. And you'll be surprised how many people are inspired by that and respect that you have the ability to do that. Especially in this age of cancel culture and social media, if you have the courage to lead, you have the courage to say, actually, like, put my hand up, I made a mistake. This is what I've learned from that mistake, and actually going forward, this is going to be the difference. And that sets the example and the cadence for the rest of the organization around, yeah, we are really continuous learners here. We have the humility to make mistakes in this environment and not be judged by our mistakes.
Love that, Andy. And earlier on, you talked about obviously your first angel investing school program that was supposed to be in person, and COVID came along and obviously changed that. But can you talk about any other times when the shit has really hit the fan and what you took from that?
Yeah, I've been in experiences even prior to the angel investing school where I've been at companies where the cultures have been really toxic. And you can often go for an interview process and you feel like, oh, this sounds like an incredible opportunity, but something's not quite right. But they're trying to sell to you and you're trying to sell to them. And then there's this key period that we call probation, where it's really important, actually, not for the company to only evaluate whether you have a place to stay here, but actually it's for you to have to feel empowered in really evaluating whether you want to stay here in this environment. And I remember joining one company in particular where it was such a toxic environment from the leadership that I realized that I wasn't really hired to change that culture. And therefore, I had to step aside and say that this opportunity is not right for me. And it took a lot of courage because they loved me. That I could see my career ascending and being promoted in that environment. And there was a lot of opportunity for me ahead. And there was a company that was on the ascension and they were growing, but it didn't sit right with my value set and who I was and what I wanted to represent in the world. And I think it takes career confidence to get to that stage where you feel like you can be 100% your authentic self. And you feel like actually through doing that, it means saying no, even in the face of great opportunity. And I recognize that a lot of people early in their careers will struggle to do that, or even founders who are early on in their journey. It's truly empowering when you can reach a place where you can really be a full expression of yourself in that way.
Andy, I know you're quite big on values and being sort of self-reflective in terms of how things fit in with your own lifestyle. But when you don't have the opportunity to do that and things are going wrong, who do you call?
There's two things I do, actually. I'm a big journaler. So I make sure I write in my journal daily, if not weekly, and I try and reflect on that every so often. So I do what I call like a wash up or retrospective with myself every 2 weeks, where I look back at what's worked well, what hasn't worked so well, and what I've learned. And that gives me a great opportunity to almost self-correct myself. And then secondly, like, they wouldn't like me to call them this, and they don't know that I use this term, but I have a set of a trust, what I call like a board of trusted advisors. And these are essentially friends of mine that I can turn to help me make more informed decisions, right? One of them is like my former manager at World First, a guy called Mark Abraham. Another guy is Francis Mainu, who was an early mentor who got me into my first career. But these are the people that I turn to when I'm looking for advice, when I'm looking for a sounding board, where I need to be challenged and beat up a little bit. And I know that they're gonna tell me the truth and come from a loving place in doing so.
Ollie, we mentioned about building a community and it going past being transactional, but here, this is a great example, isn't it, of Andy learning about that and under the pressure of trying to sell and make business work, realizing that you shouldn't be too transactional, that isn't a good thing.
Yeah, and he went into this conversation, I think, with Google. He said about, having this idea at the start of it, that what he wanted to get out of it. But what he said in hindsight is actually he should have gone up, build the rapport, maintained the relationship, and then if it naturally steered in that direction, then they could have been open to that conversation rather than trying to pre-guide it and pre-frame it too narrowly, because then ultimately you could damage that relationship. And I think there's a really good lesson in there.
And I can understand how it happens. I can definitely extend a great deal of empathy to what happened here. It's when you are under that sort of pressure, you get that one shot. You can hear all of the different things that are kind of going on. They've got to be focused, got to go in, they're very busy. They'll just want this. So you can totally see how that can happen sometimes. But yeah, trying to take that step back and just appraise people, relationships, connections, who you do business with, all that sort of stuff that we all know, but it is easy to forget.
Yeah, one thing I'd say is, particularly to founders, if you're trying too hard, sometimes it comes across in quite a negative way. So I think if you're being overly salesy or, overly pushy or applying pressure to the other person, people are going to smell it a mile off. And the advice that I always give is go with the energy of, I'm doing it without you anyway. Do you want to come along on this journey? I'm doing this. Are you coming along for the ride? Yes or no? If you're not, then that's obviously your decision. Whereas if you're trying to literally make the sale too early, then it can damage the relationship.
Those things are hard to judge, aren't they? Sometimes
they
when
are.
You're in the room,
and it obviously gets easier with time and more experience of doing, sales meetings. And if you're particularly like a B2B business, it's going to be a longer sales cycle. So you're not going to be converting people within. It's not like comparing it to like online shopping of like a one click buyout on Amazon. It's literally you're building a relationship. You're putting in weeks, sometimes months of work to convert somebody from not knowing anything about you to being most aware, and then finally being a customer and an advocate of your business. So it takes time, and I think the more you practice that sales cycle and understand where to potentially apply the pressure, then that's the key for me.
It's a really good point, and I'm not sure. I suspect that if you're going into this for the first time, you might not know. Like, how much do you invest? How much legwork do you do? For free, which is what we're talking about here, aren't we? How long does it take? How long's a piece of string? When do you know if it's going to work and when it isn't? It's hard.
Yeah, it is really hard. There's a great bit of research that Google did some time ago, Laura, called Google Zero Moments of Truth. So basically what it did is it took the initial 2 moments of truth. So the first moment of truth could be, let's say, for example, you saw a product on a shelf or you saw somebody's website. That's the first moment of truth. The second moment of truth would be maybe eating the product or experiencing the service. That's the second moment of truth. But what Google have said now is that there's this new 0 moment of truth that comes in obviously prior to those two things, where people are doing a lot of research in terms of their buying decisions. So on average, they spend 7 hours researching a product or service before they commit to making a purchasing decision. So the quicker that you can get people up to that 7 hours of, engaging with content. So it could be a podcast like this, it could be a blog, it could be a video, it could be a face-to-face meeting. The more likely they're going to make that positive buying decision. And that's obviously on average 7 hours. Some people obviously come to that quicker. With other people, it takes a lot longer. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done.
I know we started by talking about selling business to business, but I was instantly drawn to the last thing that I've just purchased, which was like 50 quid's worth of books. And it's really, I was thinking, what did I do here? Well, first of all, I saw a recommendation from someone else. Then I added them. I checked to see if they were in the library or on Blinkist. Then when they weren't, they got added to my private Amazon list. Yeah. And then I went back to it and I thought, no, I do want those books. So interesting, our little habits and patterns. And you're right, the relationship, nurture the relationship. What else do we want to say here? Oh, yeah, speedily, because I got off on a tangent there. Great advice on journaling and doing that every few weeks or so, whatever time frame fits you, but so that you can write down what's gone well, what hasn't gone so well, and then bring in some reflection onto that. And I think it does build up your own confidence, as well as seeing potentially patterns or ways of behaving, or things you've tried that have or haven't gone so well. But it is a really helpful way of also boosting your confidence, because your brain will naturally want to focus on the bits that went wrong. So if you're also doing the good stuff, then which you're training your brain to do, because that's how it's going to grow, then it's a really good little tip. And I was heartened to hear that that's what he does.
Yeah, and I love it. And there's a lot of, press about it at the moment, but it is a really good thing for your mental well-being, but that kind of cathartic experience of doing it. And I think the key takeaway though is doing that reflection. So you might journal every week, but then if you don't revisit it, then you don't get the ultimate value of it. So I really liked Andy's point of having this kind of wash up session, as he called it, where you go back and analyze it, and like you say, you'll be able to find patterns and potentially unlock new potential in yourself by reviewing what's gone well and what hasn't.
And I forget how clearly he spelt this out, but crucially, it's not just what went well and what didn't, but what was it that meant it went well or didn't go well, because that's important that you understand that element of it. Okay, shall we mention network? Who's in your network? Or do you feel we've touched on this in the previous bit? I know he raised it here again, and having his trusted advisors, people who he goes back to. It's always interesting. It's like having a nosy around, hearing who people go to. And it was, fascinating to hear who Andy goes to when he wants advice and how he keeps that relationship going as well. That's one of the bits that I find hard. It feels, I've kind of sat through meetings where people say, well, you need to think who's in your network. And I'm a bit like cringe about this, especially if they're, sort of 2 steps removed. How do you gently just keep that relationship tinkling along? You're maybe not in a position to add anything to that person's life, particularly. You're not asking for anything, but yet you sort of you kind of want to keep a touch point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but you could do simple things like maybe they've done a LinkedIn post and it could be adding a nice comment to it. It could be leaving them a recommendation. There's things that you can do at distance that will build up that value and that trust with yourself. So I think there's definitely things that you can do to nurture that relationship, even if you feel, like they might not even really know you. There's things that you can do to bring them closer into your network to have that longer term relationship that you're looking for.
I'm glad I mentioned it. I knew you'd have some advice on that. Right then, moving along to the final section of the interview. And this is a bit of future gazing, bit of advice, questions for you listening. So pin back your ears for this as we hear what Andy has in store for the next few years.
It's a great question, a scary one, isn't it? Because I'm not a mind reader, so I can't say how it's going to turn out. But, my real ambition is to train 10,000 diverse professionals on angel investing. And in doing so, we're going to see a lot more diverse founders get funded. I want to be able to tell success stories at scale of, founders that look a lot more like society. And succeeding at scale doesn't necessarily mean becoming a unicorn, but founders that are really leading the way in achieving success in business and as investors in this space. So, I want to really diversify the cap tables on a lot of these startups so that actually there's a lot more wealth being created for a lot more people that look like society.
Love that, Andy. And what difference do you actually think that will make to the world if we do have more people who are representative of society becoming investors and also becoming founders? What difference do you reckon that will make in the world?
I think it'll be twofold. One, we're going to have more inclusive entrepreneurship. So we're going to have more products intentionally designed with the rest of society in mind, right? We're not going to have men designing products for women and they have no clue what they're doing. And secondly, we're going to have representative role models. And we can't really underestimate the power of representative role models. If I think back to, there's a kid called Jordan Peterson, I think back in 2009, who was in the White House with Obama. And there's a famous picture of him stroking Obama's hair. And he's asking Obama in that moment, like, is your hair like mine? And it's such a powerful reminder of, like, if a kid really believes that, the president of the free world has hair like me, then imagine what I could achieve too. And that's the impact that we can have when we have more representative role models.
Love that, Andy. Love that. The next part of the show is essentially an opportunity for you to ask our listeners a question, Andy. So, is there something that you want to listen? Is there something that you want to ask Founded and Grounded listeners?
Yeah, I think the biggest conversation that I'm having at the moment with a lot of founders when it comes to fundraising in this climate is, should I change this? Should I adapt my story? Should I tell a certain story in a certain way so that my company can get invested in? And I'm actually going to remind founders that they need to be contrarian. You're not in the business of serving investors, you're in the business of serving customers. So this is the time to really tap into your why, to your intrinsic motivation, to remind yourself why you're starting this business. So my question to founders is, during this climate, how are you doubling down on serving your customers rather than your investors?
Great question there, Andy. Love it. I'm going to put you on the spot because the next bit of the show is one of the key tenets of Founded and Grounded. So we always ask our featured founders just to distill down just one piece of advice that they would pass on to a founder or somebody thinking of starting a business. So, Andy, what would that be?
Intelligence is overrated. Companies are a result of the people that you hire and your ability to have grit, persevere, and embrace luck, because there's going to be a lot of luck along the journey.
And how do you increase luck, Andy?
I think you increase luck by persevering and showing up and being consistent and delivering quality consistently.
Love that. And Andy, where can people find out a bit more about AIS and find you personally online?
Thanks, Ollie. By the way, this has been a great conversation. I've looked at the time and I'm surprised it's flown by. You can find AIS on the angelinvestingschool.com. We're also Angel Investing School on Instagram. And you can find myself on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter as Andy Ayim.
Love that, Andy. Bit of a curveball now. So if I knew you better, Andy, what's one question I would have asked you?
Ooh, that's a great question. One question that you could have asked me if you knew me better was, what lifestyle design choices have you made since having a child?
Love that question, Andy. And as a parent of two, and I know you're expecting another in December as well. So, yeah, what's the answer to that question, Andy?
I think there's two parts to that answer. The first is, it's quite morbid, but when I think about being on my deathbed, I know I'm not going to be asking for my investments, for my money, for my smartphone, or for my MacBook. I'm going to be asking for more time with my loved ones. So how can I optimize my time today to spend more time intentionally with them? And the second part to that answer is, I've noticed that, like, when you have an intrinsic motivation and something that compels you to act that is beyond yourself, like having a child, your ability to persevere and go further is just special. Like, it can't be described. Like, there's a parent's love and desire to do for their child that allows you to go further with your ambitions and with your endeavors in the world. And I definitely feel the impact of that since having a child and the choices that I've made along my career, even as an entrepreneur and taking risks.
So true, Andy. I mean, when my wife went back from maternity with our daughter, who's our second child, I've ended up going down to 4 days a week, and I've been doing that for over a year, and it's the best decision that I've ever made.
Love that. Love that.
So, Andy, what exactly does AIS offer?
Sure. So the Angel Investing School trains professionals on how to get started investing into startups. We have three main offerings. The first is that we do corporate training, where we go into employee resource groups like the Black Google Network and train them up on how to invest into startups and help them set up syndicates so they can invest alongside each other into startups. The second is we have a public course that we run every April and September, which anyone can apply to learn how to become an angel investor over an 8-week intensive course, which Ollie has completed and can vouch for. And the third is our Angel Investing School membership, which is an ongoing subscription to gain access to Q&As with me, deal flow, masterclasses from our experts, and ongoing community. And we're just getting started. So next year, you're going to see a lot more that I can't speak about just yet.
Exciting times, Andy. Well, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your inputs. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, Ollie.
So there are just two things that I think we should pick up on here, because we've talked loads. But one of them is about serving your customers. So Andy's question, how are you serving your customers? That is the focus. That is what it's about. It's easy to get looking at the other metrics and measuring other things, but ultimately this is the route to success, isn't it?
In very simple terms, obviously, if you don't have a customer base, you're not going to have a business, so you've got to be looking after them. And I think what good businesses do well is really they turn their customers into champions. So it's about really advocating on behalf of the business. Then you get increased referrals. You can do, offers for, the person referring the person and the person. Then you can incentivize the referrals, and ultimately what it means is that your marketing spend is going to drop drastically if you're building these super champions of your business. and they're doing the selling on your behalf. So I think you've got to be really looking after them, making sure that you're adding value to their life, and making it easy for them to refer people into your business.
Yeah. I feel at another point we should come back and talk about the referrals and how to, how you can make some money from that. Do you know what I mean? I feel that that's a whole area in itself, isn't it, that is worth coming back to. To finish with, talking about creating your own luck, where do you stand on this, Ollie?
I think you have to create your own luck. I mean, there's a great quote that I love, that 80% of success is just showing up. And I think it's so true. Like, if you're consistently showing up, being consistent, being present, saying yes to potential opportunities, then ultimately you're going to create more opportunities, and then one of them is going to go somewhere. So I think if you're going in with a closed mindset and maybe not committing to things and being a bit potentially disengaged, then you're not going to create your own luck. Whereas if you're being open-minded and welcoming opportunities, then that's when the magic really happens.
I like it. On that note, shall we just reflect back for a tick? So we're going to catch up with Samantha, our community lead then, because we always ask our founders to ask a question of you listening to this. And it's good to hear what you've been saying in response to that. We want to weave that in. So let's head to Samantha and find out what you have been saying in response to our previous episode. So Sam, just remind us who the entrepreneur was and what it was they wanted to know.
Last episode, we spoke to Piers Linney again, ex-Dragon's Den investor and Channel 4 secret millionaire, about his new business, Moblox, and the journey he's been on, finding out some really interesting things we didn't know, and I'm sure you won't have known, about his childhood and his journey to business. So a fantastic guest to have on the show, and one so many of us know and aspire to. But it's really interesting to learn a little bit more about the background of his journey that maybe we didn't know before and can help inspire us further. And of course, as all our guests do, Piers had a question for all of you listeners. His question was, as a founder, what are the core services that you need but struggle to understand and implement? To no surprise, the answers between CRM software, project management systems, accountancy software or other came back highly CRM software. I think leads and sales is often one of the blocks, although it's one of the things we most need and want in business. It can often be one of the biggest blocks and barriers, is how to grow that, how to organize that. And CRM softwares can be quite a sort of black zone of the unknown really in business. Of course, followed by accountancy software. So while CRM software took 50% of the votes, accountancy software took another 25%. Again, not massively surprising other than it wasn't higher. Finances, again, one of the things that unfortunately is a massive block and can stop us from succeeding and growing in business. And I know it can really cause some people some stress and uncertainty as to how to grow their business or how to even start a business when it comes to looking at the finance and accountancy side of what has to be done too. So no surprises there. Project management systems only had 8% of the votes. I think we're all fairly comfortable with that as a generalization. And 17% said other, with some suggestions. As to very specific sort of softwares, there are so many out there that help us in many different ways. And there's always going to be those kind of areas that we struggle with. But I'm sure Piers will be very interested to know that most of us, it's those CRM softwares that are causing that block. So thank you very much if you voted and told us a little bit about what you're struggling with to understand and implement in your business. And of course, if you would still like to join the conversation, you can come and find us on social media and let us know what you think. What blocks have you got in your business? What are the services that you are struggling to implement? And continue to tell us your ideas and thoughts.
Alrighty. Yes, do keep your Keep the conversation going on social media. Anything you want to chip in, any observations, answers to the questions, we would very much love to hear from you. And you may well get featured at the end of the podcast, who knows? In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Until next time.